They remain on record as the most consistently successful British film company in history. From offices in Wardour Street in the heart of London's film business district, and from the small Thames-side studio near Windsor Castle, they made films that played in every country in the world, in every category of entertainment. Grand period adventures, grim military stories.
What is it? Whiskey. Officers' rations.
Police dramas, suspense thrillers, comedies, travelogues, dramas.
But for most of the world, the name Hammer conjures images of fantasy and terror. Like comedies from Britain's Ealing studio, cartoons from Disney, or westerns from the Republic, the Hammer style was unique and distinctive. By subtle implication and by graphic depiction, the company made its international reputation with the primal elements of exploitation films. Sexuality and violence, flesh and blood.
The ties of flesh and blood were also quite literal. A business enterprise with a family atmosphere extending from the front office to the cast and crew, to the clapper boy and the cooks in the canteen. Home video has given renewed life to these now classic tales. Original soundtracks and paperback tie-ins have become valued collector's items. Posters given away free to theatres now sell for hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds. An album of film scores from Silver Screen Records sold out immediately in the UK, the US, and Europe.
Why then do these films inspire such nostalgic devotion? And why did the company's world influence seem to fade after 20 years, like a vampire in the rays of the morning sun? Hammer's Gothic revival was both revolutionary and extremely traditional. The blend of eroticism and the supernatural had been part of English literature since the 18th century. Mary Shelley, creator of Frankenstein, and Bram Stoker, author of Dracula, were part of this tradition, as were Henry James, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Robert Louis Stevenson. Stage adaptations of works like Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thrilled audiences on both sides of the Atlantic. On a more lurid level, the penny dreadfuls often used supernatural themes. Varney the Vampire, printed in 1847. Early movies offered similar thrills. Nosferatu, the first version of Dracula. Without dialogue to get in the way, images reached the minds of audiences around the world.
With the coming of talking pictures, the international market changed. Like the Tower of Babel, movies now spoke in 1,000 discordant voices.
Furthermore, in the 1930s and 40s, graphic violence was taboo. Movie cowboys might get shot, but you could never see them bleed.
Major Hollywood studios monopolized the world film market with name stars. Overseas audiences preferred these films.
It originated as a very small distribution company under the title Exclusive Films. The people concerned then were my grandfather, Enrique Carreras, from Spain, Spanish man, and a man called Will Hammer, or Hines, depending on how you knew him as to whether it was in his private life or he had a sort of theatrical life.
Hammer was my father, surprisingly enough. He was a successful businessman and a failed comedian. He failed because he wasn't really very funny.
Adopting a company name from Hines' stage name, Will Hammer, they made a handful of films such as this musical with American singer Paul Robeson. Prophetically, one of these early films featured Bela Lugosi, star of Hollywood's Dracula.
I cured a man.
I joined, we're very close as we sit here today, to being 50 years when I first reported for work as an office boy in Wardour Street. During the period, may I tell you, when doodlebugs were dropping on London at that time. So it was an exciting start. Well, then I had to go off and do national service. By the time I came back, my father had joined the company.
Jimmy Carreras was the most wonderful salesman I have ever met. Full of charm, knew exactly what he wanted, but charmed you out of it if it was not what you wanted.
And he took this small company and increased it in its size and put on a sales force. And Exclusive did actually become quite a small entity within the British film industry at the time of the quota quickies.
To protect domestic film production, Parliament enacted a quota system. Colonel James Carreras helped fill that quota.
But you see, Jimmy Carreras and Mike Carreras never got on. There was a great schism between them.
My father was a businessman, a salesman. He wasn't a filmmaker. I mean, there was no collision, but there was no meeting of the minds either.
I wasn't around when Jimmy Carreras was running the company. There's no doubt that that was the heyday of the company, that he created it. He was the entrepreneurial driving force. He let the directors direct the way what they wanted. He let the writers do what they wanted. He let the actors do what they wanted within a budget, creating an esprit de corps, a sense of well-being and common purpose over a tremendously long period of time and an awful lot of movies.
Will Hines' son, Tony, alternated production duties with Michael Carreras, although his secret wish was simply to write.
And after the war, I went to see him. We seemed to get on right. And he said, why didn't I join? And I'd just come out of the Air Force, and I really hadn't anything to do. So we got together, and I joined the firm. And it was then just a distribution company. It was handling other people's films. But you have to realize that after the war, there's a tremendous audience for a cinema-going audience in England. People go, they didn't even bother to find out what was on, they just went. If it was terrible, they came out disappointed. If it was good, they came out, but they still went. So anything went. And there was a tremendous boom in film distribution. The trouble was to try and get the films.
Tony Hines was a better filmmaker than I was. He was, a definitive filmmaker. Tony only lived to make films.
We became quite friendly, which is most unusual, because Tony never became friendly with anybody involved in movies. We became quite friendly.
We very luckily got hold of the rights and were encouraged to make a film by the booking manager of the ABC cinemas, which turned out to be Dick Barton, which was a tremendous successful radio series. And from that, we actually discovered that people were going to the cinema to see this very small second feature rather than to see the feature, because Dick Barton really was a national institution. And from there, it developed into another Dick Barton, which was made in Blackpool with great locations. We actually went outdoors to shoot a shot at the top of the tower at Blackpool. And from there, in a very small way, we started to make a series of radio-orientated characters and bringing them to life in the cinemas. I think it's 1948 We actually had a production program of 6 pictures a year, all based on the radio series. And from that, slowly, whatever the company policies were in changing names, but exclusive segued into Hammer Films.
Bray Studios began as a Thames-side manor house.
And a lot of it was kind of falling apart and, needed repair. And I remember once it was a terrible thunderstorm. Oh, God, the rain came down in sheets, as it can, as you know there. And the roof's leaking, everything's leaking. And Terry Fisher says, carry on. And there we are, the splash, donk, going everywhere. But we carried on.
I can remember shooting in a big room downstairs. I can't remember what film it was. And there wasn't room for the boom operator. And he had to stand outside the window with a boom through the window. And if it rained, it was too bad, he chucked a tarpaulin over himself. And that's how we filmed. And at the time, we didn't think it was extraordinary at all.
One of my jobs was to go to the airport and see if anybody got off that I recognized. And it was never the person I went to meet, because they used to bandy big names about. And I'd wait there, and no big names got off the airplane. And then somebody that I might have seen, or somebody was holding a card up, would be the actor we got for that particular film.
Don't move.
Hammer hired Anthony Nelson Keyes to run the Bray facility. He and a young assistant named Jimmy Sangster both went on to become producers.
I worked for Hammer ever since I came out of the forces, which was when I was about 20. And I worked with them constantly. We'd work from 8:30 to 5:30 on Wednesdays and Fridays, and to 6 o'clock on the other 3 days. And they were very strict about breaking up on time.
As executive producer, used to cut the turkey at Christmas, it was a really small family, permanent unit. Our crew used to, I think probably 3 years was like a minimum engagement when they used to join Hammer in those days. We had the same directors alternating, and the producers were Tony Hines and myself. Certain types of films that he enjoyed making, I didn't, and certain types of films I liked making, he didn't. But the studio only made one film at a time, and that is a tremendous advantage in not only everybody knowing everybody, but everybody knew what the hell they were doing. They were all working on the same film, and the Americans adored this.
Output was limited to second features, the bottom halves of double bills. Partnership with Robert Lippert secured all-important American distribution, a bit more money, and stock shots from other Lippert pictures.
And that's really how we got into the American market, through Lippert. A big influence in our lives. And that started what I call the second cycle of the development of Hammer, which the first cycle was the quota quickies. The second cycle was really quota quickies, slightly bigger, but with an American ingredient in them. And suddenly, we were a British company that got known in America. Unheard of in those days.
But in the early 50s, there was little to distinguish the company.
They were not even on their way to becoming a cult then.
Hammer flowed with the incoming tide of television by adapting a BBC serial that had Britons glued to the telly. The X in Experiment emphasised that the story was too horrific for children.
We were off on our way to Tangier, and we were leaving the airport, and Tony Hines raced up in a car, and just before we got on the plane, he put a whole bundle of television scripts in my hand and said, read these in Tangier. We want to make a film of them. I said to Tony Hines, I would like to do this as a documentary, and I'd like to shoot it, cinema verite, handheld cameras, all that. And he said, okay, do it.
The Creeping Unknown became the American title, as Quatermass had no name recognition outside the United Kingdom.
3 men went into outer space. Only one of them came back. came back a strange, distorted creature, haunted and possessed by something beyond human understanding.
Lippert sent Brian Donlevy over to play Bernard Quatermass, director of the first British rocket group.
Unlock his mind for me, Briscoe, and find it. I know you can do it. It isn't just a question. I know the strain and tension you've been under, but to stop now when we're so close.
These were stories with a very dynamic hero who was a no-nonsense kind of scientist who let nothing stand in his way and was actually kind of ruthless in his way, which was a really interesting protagonist for a picture. Usually the protagonists in pictures, these people were the villains in American pictures.
You've destroyed him like you've destroyed everything else you've touched.
There's no room for personal feelings in science, Judith.
I want to cordon around the entire area, evacuate all public, get information to check up every movement that's likely to take place inside this radius tonight. Yes, sir.
With Quatermass Experiment and the Terence Fisher pictures, and the sequel to Quatermass, which is called Enemy from Space, which was another mind blower, I began to notice a musical score going on. I mean, the music of these movies was really astonishing. Turns out it was a composer named James Bernard.
And it was then that I started to work with John Hollingsworth, who was already the music director of Hammer. And he played the tapes to Tony Hines, who said, "Okay, let's try." And so there I was, suddenly flung into the Quatermass Experiment. Very alarming it was, too, the first time round. Quatermass was scored, I think, entirely for strings and percussion. It seemed to suit the subject very well.
The special effects fellow that we had, Les Bowie, did miracles for nothing. Always complaining, always saying, how can I do this? It's impossible. Always came up with it. And that monster was, in fact, a piece of tripe.
Again emphasizing the X certificate, Hammer followed with X the Unknown, a thriller about black radioactive ooze from beneath the earth.
There was Tony Hines and Mike Carreras, and we were batting around ideas, and it seemed at the end of a session I'd come up with the most ideas, so Tony Hines said, go away and write it. And I said, I'm not a writer, I'm a production manager. And he said, well, write it, if we like it, we'll buy it. So I wrote it, and he liked it, and he bought it.
It's on its way. The man on the main gate had it just like the others. It's coming in on the west side. Look! There it is, on the roof!
And posters were the great sale. He used to go over with most elaborate artwork posters. I mean, I remember him once telling an executive that we wanted to do a picture about the Yeti, and the man became most interested in what the Yeti would look like, and Jimmy said to him, we don't know, we haven't caught one yet.
Bernard Robinson's art department transformed the Bray Manor House into a Tibetan temple, while the camera crew shot action scenes on location in the French Pyrenees.
And we had what was laughingly called a crash course in skiing. We had 2 days of it, that's all, the bottom before all went up and hung on by our teeth.
Forrest Tucker starred with a fellow who became rather linked with Hammond over the years.
They know it was me. Stay here. Wait. Ed, I can hear you. You've got to understand, that isn't Shelley, it isn't anybody. I can hear his voice. It's in your own mind. It's just happened to me, too.
A great guy, and a great guy with props. He works out overnight every single prop and thing that he can use, never tells anybody, and it comes out during the scene. So he became known as Props Peter.
We dare you to see the abominable snowman of the Himalayas.
What we tried desperately to do is we all said we must never ever see that Yeti. You can see pieces of him, bits, an arm, of an eye, of thing, and let people build their own vision of him.
Nigel Neal adapted his BBC sequel, Quatermass 2. Future director Brian Forbes was one of the victims of a mass alien invasion. Only Quatermass suspects the truth, that the synthetic food in a top-secret facility is not for human consumption. But Nigel Neal still felt Don Levy was too harsh, too bullying, too American.
Vincent Broadhead is dead. Dead? I watched him die a few hours ago in that plant. His whole body covered with some kind of corrosive poisoning, eaten away.
Naturally, the director defended his star.
Now, with that sort of a thing, a down-to-earth, prosaic, honest-to-God man like Brian Donlevy was an enormous help.
I know that Nigel Neal, who wrote the teleplays, is not happy with the condensation that went on. But having seen the teleplays, you know, they're now available here, and the 6-hour Quatermass in the Pit, for instance, 3 hours, whatever long it is, that the film adaptations were really remarkably good. I mean, the high points and all the ideas were all retained in these things.
That pipe has been blocked with human pulp.
No.
No, mister. Yes, what is it? Tell us. Inside those domes are creatures from outside this earth.
Are you mad?
I've seen them. Thousands of tiny creatures that can join together and expand into things 100 feet high.
Quatermass and the Pit, televised in 1958, was planned by Hammer for more than a decade. Ultimately, Andrew Keir took the Quatermass role under the direction of Roy Ward Baker.
Well, I read it and I thought it was absolutely marvellous. It was a really fireproof script. It was excellent. The film was meant to be made at Elstree Studios. And they suddenly said, sorry, we have no space. But just up the road was the old Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studio. And they were only too delighted because their studio was empty. So we had the whole place to ourselves. So it was very lucky, and an enormous back lot, which we built the exterior of the underground station.
An excavation uncovers a rocket ship of unknown origin and the rotting remains of giant insects. Quatermass deduces that alien technology endowed the human race with intelligence and the will to purge society of anyone who does not follow the will of the hive.
Roy Ward Baker didn't want me for Quatermass. He wanted, what was his name? Kenneth Moore. And for 7.5 weeks, it was utter hell.
Those sort of choices were made in a small committee, really, of Tony Hines, who was really the head of production at any rate at Hammer, and was also one of the partners in Hammer, and Sir James Carreras, and Tony Nelson-Keyes, and me. Who put his name up first, I really couldn't remember, because he was excellent.
They were coming. Who? What were? Them.
You saw the creatures.
They were alive. Alive?
Despite the fact that I didn't get on with Roy, and I was a bit tricky with other people, but we gelled as a unit, you know, as a group of actors.
I wanted to kill you.
Why?
Because you are different.
I thought that some of the scenes were uneven.
Rooney, it's Barbara. She's the one. Get down here, quick.
My duty now is to quieten public alarm. And you keep your damn paws out of things.
Listen, I'm advising you all to leave. There may be grave danger. I tell you, this could be dangerous. Get back! It was what I was afraid of. The thing got a huge intake of energy. The very substance of it seemed to be coming alive. And then you can't see this world any longer.
It's just brilliant. It's just fantastic. What a great idea, you know. What a great way of finishing it off.
It's still a remarkable picture. There was an idea movie, and that was really unusual.
The film came out the same year as 2001. By then, the name Hammer signified Gothic fantasy. By By 1950, the classic fiends had been used as buffoons and comic foils.
In the 50s, when the genre was basically in decline, the horror movies had sunk pretty low. And when the Hammer pictures came along, they were obviously classier.
Americans Max Rosenberg and Milton Subotsky approached Hammer's silent partner with a Frankenstein script.
It didn't bear much relationship to the film that we finally made. They had the ear of Elliot Hyman, I think I'm correct in saying, and Elliot, by this time we were now associated with Elliot, but he, because he didn't know much about it either, thought that was a good idea in making, because there hadn't been a Gothic horror made since the Universal cycle, and certainly not in colour. And so he really sent the script over. Tony looked at it and said, no, we can't do this. It just wasn't good enough.
And I'm given a script, which I didn't really like. It's rather boring, and it's a sort of rehash of the old. But anyway, we were going to do it.
A cheap black and white production was planned, with Boris Karloff considered for the role of the old Baron, when Hammer learned they would be sued if they copied any elements from the older films.
So we had to make a film that was entirely different from the first one, but then it became fun.
Instead, they planned an all-new version with Jack Asher shooting in Eastman colour and Jimmy Sangster completely rewriting the script.
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I don't think I read it. I just seen all the old Frankenstein movies. The only problem with Universal was they had a copyright on the monster. We couldn't use the idea of the Boris Karloff type monster with the bolts through his neck. We couldn't do that. That was the only problem. I mean, Frankenstein was public domain. That's why we came up with a different one, different design.
Terence Fisher had directed moody TV episodes of Robin Hood and a thriller admired by Hitchcock himself, So Long at the Fair.
Ah, it was lovely. He was such fun. He always knew exactly what he wanted, and that's why the films were made fast and the way they were.
Quiet, didn't have a lot to say, knew what he was doing. He was an old-time pro.
Luckily, I had a break in my BBC work and was able to take the role I'd seen Colin Clive play in the original 1931 film.
We've discovered the source of life itself, and we've used it to restore a creature that was dead.
We never make our films with tongue-in-cheek. Having played so many of the period doctors, I always go to my doctor to ask, how do you take a brain now to do anything? Because I think that you must do it all correctly.
I can't prove you murdered him, but I can stop you using his brain. Why? He has no further use for it? Don't be a fool! Be careful! You damage it!
A sale to Warner Brothers brought barely enough to finish the film. £40,000, about $112,000. Christopher Lee brought a new interpretation to the role of the man-made man.
The legs are independent of the arms. The hands sort of don't coordinate with the feet or the rest of the body. So I tried to play the character like an ill-coordinated, childish creature.
The first day I met Christopher, he was disappointed that he hadn't any dialogue. I told him, well, consider yourself lucky. I've read the script.
Well, we were shooting in the dark. We really were. I did about 3 tests, if I remember rightly, for the character. They were quite dreadful. I mean, one of them made me look like a combination between a wolf and a pig. And the other was actually surprisingly quite close to the Elephant Man. And then I think it was I, or perhaps it was Phil Leakey, the makeup man, or Roy Ashton, the other makeup man, who we put our heads together. And I think I said, look, it's bits and pieces of other people, so it should be patched together. So there were these lumps and these scars and one dead eye and the stitch marks and everything, which was pretty unpleasant.
Makeup man Phil Leakey created a face that's been rightly described as looking like a road accident, a patchwork creature of shards and stitches. It was almost impossible for me to eat or drink, and naturally there weren't many people prepared to sit down and eat and drink with me.
It's never horrific to you. Well, in fact, we might have laughed. Probably did.
I guess I was 10 or 11. Well, it was terrifying. I mean, I was scared to death. I've always heard the makeup criticized in later years as not being a very good makeup, but I thought it was pretty creepy.
When we saw Curse of Frankenstein, there was a graphic quality to it that was totally shocking, which made it extremely endearing to us. We enjoyed it a great deal. And I'll never forget the audience's reaction to that midnight showing at the New York Paramount. They loved it. They loved it. We were about 15 years old, I think, my friends and myself.
Won't you understand you're in real danger? What Victor is doing is dangerous to everyone in the house. Now, you cannot possibly conceive what dreadful thing he's planning to do.
What are you trying to tell me, Paul? That Victor's wicked? Insane?
What is amazing today to me is the production value, the beauty of the sets, the costumes. They were all real. They were all Victorian costumes.
Elizabeth, come back!
The disembodied hands, eyes, and organs were liberally garnished with bright red blood, much to Christopher's dismay when he was shot in the face.
When this happened, I gave vent to the most ear-splitting shriek, which literally paralyzed everybody on the set. I don't think they'd ever heard anything like it. And it was genuine, because there's some agent in this blood, glycerine, whatever. I felt somebody had put a red-hot poker into my eye.
The film grossed 70 times its production cost, $7 million. The company had, in fact, created a being with a life of its own.
Hammer made their first remake after the 29 pictures in 1956 or 58, I think it was. And it was the Frankenstein picture, and it was only one amongst five. There was Up the Junction, I think it was Peter Sellers, and Frankenstein picture, and two or three others, quite a mass picture. No idea of starting this incredible snowball.
I remember everyone being astounded at the success of that movie, though. I mean, it took off. And I don't think we got very good reviews, did we?
The critics hated us. I mean, really loathed the film and loathed us. But it started the cycle, and it started Hammer, as it really became known, Hammer Horror. The critical reaction came at the same moment as the cues. I mean, if you've got a choice, what are you going to do? You're going to read the newspaper or look at the cues?
The success of Curse of Frankenstein was way out of proportion to what was expected. I think if that picture hadn't been as successful as it was in America, there might not have been any other big Hammer films.
Through his friend, Mike Frankovich, James Carreras struck a 3-film pact with Columbia Pictures to include a sequel, originally called Blood of Frankenstein. The script focused on the continuing attempts of Baron Frankenstein to perfect his grisly work.
In the year 1860, I, Baron Frankenstein, was sentenced to death on the guillotine. But I have escaped the guillotine, and I shall avenge the death of my creation.
I wanted to scare people and make them sort of shudder. And I think what is the most shudder-making thing, from my point of view, was cannibalism. So I put cannibalism into the picture.
As Peter and I used to play games on the set all the time.
Who is he? Nobody. He isn't born yet.
We had a sheep's brain. And so we shot the scene, and we didn't finish the scene on the day we were using the brain, and we had to pick it up the next morning. And when I opened it, it was actually alive. I mean, the smell was appalling. All the technicians were fainting. So we had to, I said, I can't work with this thing. I said, it's going to upstage me. It's going to give it...
I think what he's doing is a ruthless thing. And it might be different from Mary Shelley, but it wasn't much different from the other movie Frankensteins.
There was also an abortive TV pilot film, but it was shot in Hollywood, not by the Hammer production team.
It was just disaster. I mean, the people who were involved, which were Screen Gems, had no idea what they were trying to make. I mean, I don't know why they ever came to us in the first place, because, you know, we had made some fairly good Gothic stories. When I got there, I took with me 6 scripts, all written by Jimmy Sangster, and all ready to shoot. I mean, in good professional nick. And the first thing they made me do was to sit down and listen to the title music. They'd had some jingle. I mean, that confused me slightly that we were listening to jingle music before we even made anything, but they were very proud of that. And then they started to trot out some directors who I think they kept in cupboards on the lower floor or wherever, ready to work, you know, with have megaphone, will travel sort of directors. And I just couldn't believe the whole scene, so I kicked up a bit of a stink. And we started again by them getting out a list of writers.
Your name is Halbert. If you remember and understand, lift your hands.
And finally, having gone through with their head writing honcho, he said to me, there's a guy here I think lives in England called Jimmy Sangster. Why don't we try him? So we did full circle. I had the 6 scripts under my arm, which they hadn't read. Probably Jimmy had put another name of them, I don't know. So I said to them, well, I actually know this man. I have some influence. I could probably get him to do a script. And then, of course, when I told them that all these were his, I mean, the whole thing just fell apart. I went home. It was Christmas time. I couldn't bear it anymore. And Tony Hines went over to finish the project. And even he couldn't get them to make a good film.
If nothing else, it pointed out how uninspired the first film might have been. Hammer and the Baron went back to work in 1963.
You are interrupting my work.
Oh, work. The work. Careful.
Hands.
Please, Father.
No!
A wrestler named Kiwi Kingston played this new monster under the direction of Freddie Francis.
Terry was unwell at that time. I mean, Terry became unwell and then got progressively worse. By this time, Hammer had cleared with Universal that they could use the original makeup. And I thought it needed somebody much more physical than dear old Chris. And our man was physical, but I would have, you know, if we did it again, I would have somebody who could act a little better. And obviously, I usually think of the most effective way visually. You know, having been a DP, and still am, I always think visually first.
The Baron was a bit ahead of his time. I mean, I was transplanting human organs before that clever Dr. Christian Barnard in South Africa in 1968.
Get out of his way, you fool!
Go back and kill him.
He lives. See, hence he's alive.
Terry Fisher returned in 1967.
The Terence Fisher pictures tend to be shot on long masters, I noticed. And one of the fascinations in those pictures is just to sort of watch him try to do something with essentially an empty frame.
You see, a shield of indestructible matter.
What is it for?
What is it for? To give life after death, my friend, that's what it's for. Life after death.
My dear, that man possesses such power, such knowledge, such... Well, sometimes I don't even understand him myself.
With novice performers like Playboy model Susan Denberg, Terry patiently blocked out the action bit by bit.
Who am I? Who am I?
Frankenstein Created Woman is a very interesting picture. It's got a lot of interesting thematic stuff that you really wouldn't expect, that they didn't have to deal with. In Frankenstein Created Woman in particular, I remember great stills of Peter Cushing and Susan Denberg that weren't in the movie. You know, and I could never figure out whether they were never shot or whether they were cut out or what the story was.
The stills had nothing to do with the story. Hammer just wanted to sell theatre tickets. In 1967, Frankenstein moved to the larger Elstree Studios with Terry Fisher again as director.
Terry would pretty much let you go through the scene. He trusted your own instincts. He was very easy to work for.
You haven't finished.
He would just tell you what you'd be doing previous to this, what your emotions would be likely to be like, and then ask you to run it through.
Right. Action.
I can transplant his brain. If I don't, it'll die through lack of oxygen.
But that would mean you'd have to remove someone else's brain to do it.
Of course, Carl. How else?
The police. They're searching all the houses.
You must choose between the flames and the police.
Once more into the breach, with blackmail, murder, and skullduggery.
Oh, but he's only doing it for a frightfully good cause.
I loved Peter. He was very gentle. Everybody loved Peter. He was very gentle. He adored his wife. He was kind.
What a lovely piece of export.
I can't speak too highly of him.
What have you done to him?
How many heart transplants today? Hearts? My dear James, they're old-fashioned. We're on brains now. Are you? Yes.
Jimmy Carreras rarely visited our sets. He wasn't too keen on horror pictures, and seeing a crew of 50, at least 40 of whom appeared to be doing absolutely nothing, used to make him a bit testy. He preferred to stay in Wardour Street.
That was their business. It wasn't his business. I don't think he particularly cared about the films themselves. Now, as a film person, I would say that's exactly the kind of person you want running a film company, someone who lets the creative people get on with it. And if the price for that is a degree of cynicism on his part, fine. It worked extremely well for Hammer.
Hammer opted for a younger Baron, the late Ralph Bates. Veronica Carlson played the Hazel Court role for Jimmy Sangster, who directed, wrote, and produced.
Well, Jimmy was irrepressible. He had a great sense of humour. At lunchtime, we went into the restaurant, laughed ourselves silly about everything, calmed down, and then Jimmy said, "Now be serious."
I had the most fun ever directing that movie, which is not a good position to be in, writer, producer, and the director, because there's nobody to tell you you're making a mistake.
But fresh, mind you. Nothing more than 3 days old.
Anything I bring you will be so fresh. Get past the government meat inspector.
It's almost like the same saga that the Universal Pictures had, where they kept adding more monsters and trying to, make the pictures seem more exciting than they had been previously. And then by the time they'd done the parodies, it was over. It's the same thing that's happened to the Western.
6-foot 7-inch David Prowse wore a diaper and a bald cap as this monster.
I said, "Have you got any ideas as to how you're going to play this monster?" He said, "I got 3 children." I said, "Just to play about with them and frighten them. I stand up as big as I can. And I sort of walk towards them and say, 'I am the monster.' You see, and the kids will run away from me in terror." He said, "That's fine, perfect. That's just what we want." And so that was how we finished up. Playing this monster with.
David looked far more imposing in black leather years later in Star Wars. As usual, the next film began with a poster, eventually modified. With burned hands useless for surgery, the Baron enlists a young surgeon to help fashion one last abomination. It was the Baron's last hurrah, so far. Because of the period, I was given a wig covered in Marcel waves. I thought it maybe looked rather like Helen Hayes.
I knew you couldn't give up your work completely. And you haven't.
David Prowse also played this monster in a stiff mask and hairy rubber suit.
It was a wetsuit and a mask. I could get in the complete outfit within like 20 minutes. It was so simple. I think that my acting as the monster and Monster from Hell was probably the high point. The high point of, this includes Darth Vader and everything else that I've done. I still think that Monster from Hell was probably one of the best acting jobs that I've ever done.
If I've succeeded this time, then every sacrifice will have been worthwhile.
We had one stunt where he had to, I was on the rampage in the laboratory.
Professor!
And Peter had to come and calm me down, smashed the chloroform bottle in his coat, sort of jumped up onto the table, made a dive across the dive from off. I mean, the guy's in his like 60s, you know, at the time. And I'm swinging him around, trying to get him off, and doing the sort of airplane, like an airplane spin, like a wrestler does, like, you know. And eventually, I have to collapse in a heap after being suffocated by the chloroform. We eventually collapsed in a heap with him still hanging on like grim death, you know, on the back. And when we finished, the whole studio got up and applauded. It was wonderful.
Longtime employee Roy Skeggs had risen to producer. Tony Hines wrote the script as John Elder, the composer Jimmy Bernard, and Terence Fisher directing our last film together.
But even if the monster was not state-of-the-art,
Well?
the Baron was his usual warm and considerate self.
If everything could be reborn, unblemished, if a new version of his true self could be created, huh? In the normal way, by mating. But who with? Sarah.
For good or ill, these films brought Technicolor blood to the screen. Without them, we may not have seen The Wild Bunch, or even the black comedy of the original MASH.
To Baron Frankenstein, creator of man.
In any case, Hammer breathed new life into the Mary Shelley myth. In return, Frankenstein created Hammer.
They will never be rid.
In 1958, Universal Pictures allowed Hammer to remake Dracula in exchange for U.S. distribution rights.
Horror of Dracula was a particularly big moment in my life and the life of a lot of kids my age. We had watched the Universal Pictures, and they were scary, but they were on television in your house. So there was something about that was a little safer about watching those pictures. But in a theater with color, I remember kids' parents not letting them go see it because it was supposed to be so scary.
On one side, the power of good.
Castle Dracula is somewhere here in Klausenberg. Will you tell me how I get there?
On the other, the seductive allure of evil. Jimmy Sanks's script eliminated the supernatural powers suggested by Bram Stoker, but substituted something even more potent: sex appeal.
I thought the more human he became, the less magic or fantasy figure he became, the more threatening he was.
And then I think the better of the two, the film that we really felt went further, was The Horror of Dracula. You know, there's nothing like the introduction of Dracula in that picture, where he simply walks down the stairs and walks over to Jonathan Harker and says, "Hello, I'm Dracula."
Mr. Harker, I'm glad that you've arrived safely.
Count Dracula.
I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house.
Slip-on canine fangs became de rigueur for all vampires to come, in Hollywood, Italy, Mexico, France, even Japan. Like Frankenstein, this was a drastic change from previous versions.
You must help me. You must. You're my only hope. You must.
I'll help you. I promise.
I decided to play him as a malevolent hero. I decided to play him as a man of immense dignity, immense strength, immense power, immense brain, because it's all there. He's a kind of a Superman, actually.
Dracula was sexy, and he was seducing people, and it was basically going to bed with women, you know, and afterward they just thought he was great.
Particularly as my dear friend Christopher Lee plays the character of Dracula, the women are very much attracted to him. I mean, that first picture, you had the lady opening her French windows, lying back and waiting for her lover to come.
Well, that was definitely in the screenplay, and I think Terry Fisher, the director, certainly emphasized it. It wasn't a new ingredient. I mean, it's definitely been there. If you look at Nosferatu, and I mean, even in the strangest forms of these films, there's a strong sexual element. But in the color, again, the blood became a little more gory, the sex became a little more cleavage, and the whole thing grew up a little.
I thought after we'd done the first one, we'd have a complete reshuffle. And I was rather surprised when I was told that I had to have the same people. As a matter of fact, as it worked out, it couldn't have been better. As I say, Cushing had been a star, and I was delighted to have him in Frankenstein. I thought he was excellent in Dracula, and really you couldn't have found a better person than Chris Lee for Dracula, I don't think, anywhere. It was quite original, I think, making him a very presentable, quite sexually attractive, not to me, but quite sexually attractive actor, instead of this rather florid, puffy-faced gentleman, the one I'm associated with.
The one I found just a little bit more difficult was Van Helsing, because in the book by Bram Stoker, he's described as a very old, little, withered man who speaks almost double Dutch. And this was going back, nearly 25 years, when I was younger and prettier, if that's possible. One thing that Dracula didn't like was crucifix. And there were so many times I had to use one that in the end I thought it would become ludicrous. I was rather like a travelling salesman in crucifix eye.
This three-note dropping octave theme underscored the power of the title character.
Taking the title of the movie, is that what you mean? And thinking of a tune that fits it. And the obvious one is Dracula.
I had this date with this guy that I was trying to impress, and all of 16, and I'm looking, I'm going,
This is not Lucy, the sister you loved. It's only a shell, possessed and corrupted by the evil of Dracula.
and I'm grabbing him and I'm doing all of this, and all of a sudden this scene comes in where they put the stake in, and I faint. Are you all right? Are you all right? And I'm going, oh God, oh God.
The end of Horror of Dracula was one of the few times that I can remember when I was a kid, people screaming in a theater. And they screamed just because it was so horrible and so scary.
Right at the end of the picture, Van Helsing forces Dracula into a shaft of sunlight by rushing along, pulling some curtains down. Whereupon he withdrew yet another crucifix out of his pocket. I said, could we not have something different? And I suggested that they had the long refractory table, a candlestick at each end, and I could rush along like a mad thing, leap on the table again, grab one candlestick, rush to the other, and then boing them together. And it worked, because it made quite a jolly good climax. And I believe they used the end of that picture in the second Dracula, which I wasn't in for some reason.
Dollar for dollar, the film outperformed Hitchcock's Vertigo, released the same year. Critics castigated the film as revoltingly inferior to the 1931 version. But Jack Asher was hailed for his camera work, and Terry Fisher's status as a filmmaker was assured. In New York for the premiere, we found out just how valuable a product we had created.
James Carreras, Tony Hines, Peter Cushing and I, the four of us went to the office of the president of Universal Film. His name was Al Daff. And he then said, gentlemen, this film of yours will lift Universal out of bankruptcy. Now, I've made a point of asking Peter Cushing and Tony Hines and Jimmy Carreras over the years, did he really say that, or did I imagine it? He said it. Interesting.
Brides of Dracula in 1960 featured a sexually ambiguous Baron Meinster who drank the blood of men, women, even his own mother.
You needn't be afraid, she's dead.
It offered strong roles to Martita Hunt and Frida Jackson, again under Terry Fisher's direction, as Dr. Van Helsing continued his zealous crusade against the corrupt cult of vampirism.
David Peel as the Baron, blindingly handsome. Beautiful Yvonne Monlore, France's latest sex kitten, as Marianne, whose beauty was her passport to the twilight world of the undead.
Neither the budget nor my sense of the character allowed the original climax. Van Helsing conjuring a horde of bats to destroy the depraved Baron. But a jolly good fight and a splash of holy water and a burning windmill provided a fine alternative. Count Dracula himself returned 8 years after the original 1958 film. John Trevelyan of the British Board of Censors objected to a ritual used to revive the Count from the ashes of the first film, so Hammer toned it down a bit. Instead of cutting the victim's head off, Dracula's disciple tastefully just slits his throat. Charming, so unlike the home life of our dear Queen.
I must kill him. He is already dead. He is undead, Mr. Kent. He can be destroyed, but not killed.
Over 3 warm days in May 1965, the brother of Francis Matthews shot these home movies at Bray Studios. Camera angles will hide the fact that the castle is really only 1 story high. There are a great many scenes to shoot, arrivals and departures, and the climax.
Susan Farmer and Barbara Shelley are on their lines. Charles Tingwell snoozes. Christopher Lee discusses the action, and Francis Matthews paces out his walk across the castle drawbridge.
The heroes are always boring in those films. They have to be, because the excitement comes from the character roles and the villain. Since you're not going to do anything, it's better you don't say anything either. I wish you could run it again and hear me saying, I must kill him. Just after this terrible thing has happened. It's not only the delivery of the line, but the fact that I allowed Terry to let me say the line. My sister-in-law's a vampire, my brother's dead, my wife's nearly been killed. I'm exhausted. There was always a danger with Hammer that they forgot what had happened to you.
Makeup man Roy Ashton inserts hand-painted contact lenses for that wild, bloodshot look. Sometimes with these wretched contact lenses in, I could hardly see at all. I'd lunge for somebody and miss them altogether. Terry was a great arranger. He'd say, show me what you're going to do, and I'll tell you if it's right or wrong. And he always gave editor James Needs exactly what was needed.
First assistant Bert Batt supervises the frozen moat, actually a plaster surface covered in a salt solution to simulate ice. On action, Christopher strides regally, holding his cloak for the proper billowing effect. Later that day, the climax.
It's too late, Kent. Get away from there. It's too late.
Dialogue in the original script was just dreadful. So we compromised. The character remained mute.
Why did you shoot him?
It would do no good, my dear.
Impervious to bullets, perhaps.
Running water.
But not the pure elements. Whatever the merits of the individual films, the combination of technical expertise, on-screen talent, and showmanship proved that British films could succeed in the world marketplace.
Of the 19 films released by 20th Century Fox in 1966, only 6 were profitable. 2 of those were Hammer, this one, and Rasputin, the Mad Monk. In later films, we could afford stuntmen like Eddie Powell to do the more dangerous scenes, but that's really me, getting a lungful of cold water in the name of art.
It's a good take, but the aftermath is a bit anticlimactic. Wardrobe mistress Rosemary Burrows cleans off Dracula's shoes and cape, and Christopher Lee slips out of his wet clothes, presumably into a dry martini. But the ice thawed less than 2 years later. You just can't keep the old boy down.
I know that on that one, Terry was definitely not fit, so there was never any question of them asking Terry to do it.
Director Freddie Francis had been an Oscar-winning director of photography, or DP.
Then later, when people like Freddie Francis, who was the DP, started to direct, the pictures would go in for a little bit more gimmicky visuals.
Arthur Grant, he was a great fan of mine when I was a cameraman, and I let him use my filters from The Innocents for that, with the sort of graduating colours coming in from the side.
These amber filters visually indicated an aura of evil.
There is a girl.
Maria?
Bring her to me.
Irresistible to women, unstoppable by men.
Christopher Lee, Veronica Carlson, Hammer's new star discovery, Dracula's most beautiful victim.
Well, I used to skip classes at college if I knew there was a new Dracula film out or a new Frankenstein film out, and they were always the Hammer films. I don't think that I thought that I would ever be up there with them, but I yearned to be just that, and I pretended.
They lost a lot of what I'd hoped to get in it. I wanted to accentuate the romantic interest between the boy and the girl, and which I did do in the shooting, but as I say, once we'd finished shooting, the film is put in the mincing machine and wound up. I went away for a week's holiday, and when I came back, they'd finished editing it. The film was probably due out in about another 2 weeks anyway.
Very tall, very aristocratic, beautiful operatic voice. I think he is the epitome of Dracula. It was a dream come true.
The American distributor came up with a silly, effective ad catch line, "Boy, does he give a hickey."
The big difference that those pictures had at the time from American pictures was they were not just gorier, because the gore, if you look back at them, was actually kind of tame. Although at the time it was a little bit more than people were used to, but it's mainly the sex. The parade of buxom British starlets, close-ups, alleged close-ups on medallions that are really, huge buxom shots. These myths have a certain built-in Freudian fascination that never really goes away.
You're talking about the Van Helsing riding a stake in is sexual. If you like to look at it the way it is, but I don't think that's ever meant. But no, the reason for staking Dracula is to get rid of him.
And they nearly did. To save money, accountant Brian Lawrence suggested a Dracula film in name only. But the American distributor insisted that the title character actually appear. Sir James Carreras pleaded with me, saying that I would throw the entire crew out of work if I didn't appear. So, of course, I accepted.
Alice.
Who are you? How do you know my name?
But they now had to fit the character into the script, so I was only required to pop up from the occasional dark corner and do very little else.
No.
Secure enough to spoof his image, Christopher Lee appeared in The Magic Christian, first of 4 films with Raquel Welch.
And Christopher and I became good friends also at one point when I was living in London. He and his wife Gita, they were very nice people, and he was quite an elegant and quite a sensual Dracula. I thought that was just an act, and he was quite like Dracula, actually, Christopher.
Within a year, Hammer ground out another sequel.
What I was trying to incorporate is the element of magic, the mystery, the touch of the supernatural. There was one thing that nobody else had ever done, which was when the hero, Jonathan Harker, I think it is in the book, he looks out of his window and he sees Dracula climb out of a window of the castle. It had a certain amount of opposition because it was going to cost money to build a special set for this. But at any rate, we did, When Christopher Lee has to pick up the girl and carry her from one room to another, or whatever, he said to me, well, I can carry her, but how am I going to open the door? And I said, Count Dracula doesn't open doors. The door opens for him. He goes through and the door closes behind him. They've got them all in the supermarkets now, exactly the same thing.
But this one barely received American release.
The bloodline was getting thin, so Hammer tried a transfusion in a new vein.
I think it came from a distributor. I think it was partly accepted by us eagerly as a change of scene. It didn't work. It was a mistake.
The late Canadian director Alan Gibson put us all through our paces. Vampirism went mod.
That was the first time, I think, in my short career at that time that I realized that I actually did want to act. This was really it, because I believed in what I was doing.
Something new, yet as old as time.
Come on, Johnny.
A date with the devil.
I was Dracula's disciple. I was 22 and I enjoyed it enormously. He was absolutely the part, you know. You couldn't imagine anyone being better than him or being more impressive than him.
I summoned you! It was my will.
Just his presence alone helped you, you know what I mean?
One bright spot was the return of Peter Cushing as the descendant of Dr. Van Helsing.
He was delightful. He was very tough and very, very fit for a man of his age. And I would do a lot of the stunts with him, grappling and so on, and he was in very good shape. And he did a lot of his own stunts, I mean, falling off hay wagons and things like that. Extraordinary man.
You could be Dracula's next victim.
Seriously, I am a fully fledged vampire because we had the scene where I had to have Christopher Lee just sunk his fangs into me, and he actually he got a little carried away and drew blood. So I am a fully fledged vampire. That is one of my claims to fame, which I have on my resume.
You don't have to act much, because he is very frightening when he has all his gear on, his white face and his contact lenses. And he's very tall. I'm not small, and he is very tall. At that moment, I was being bitten by Dracula, and I believed it.
Christopher Lee had major reservations with the story.
I stopped making them in 1972 because, in my opinion, the presentation of the character had deteriorated to such an extent, particularly bringing him into the contemporary day and age, that it really no longer had any meaning.
Nevertheless, when the cameras rolled, we both gave it everything we had. Lee's final Dracula was out to destroy mankind with a deadly virus and deprive himself of human victims. A rather twisted death wish.
Van Helsing, I call upon you to witness my supreme triumph.
You are living and yet you are dead, the undead. You cannot die. You must want to.
You will pray for death. Release. And so you destroy every living soul on this earth. Now left with an empty world to command. Is that what you want, Count Dracula? A last blaze of utter horror and violence? The ghastly annihilation of an entire planet? Is this your own death wish? My revenge has spread over centuries and has just begun!
That was one of the few Bram Stoker lines that managed to creep into the scripts. This film finally wound up in America, years after it was made, under a rather generic title.
Count Dracula and his vampire bride.
Other fine actors have since donned the cloak. Frank Langella, Jacques Palance, Louis Jourdain, George Hamilton and Gary Oldman. But Hammer's Dracula seems to live eternally in the memories of those who experienced him.
I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house. The growing facility at Bray Studios reflected the company's expanding horizons.
And we all lived through the times when the first stage went up. There was never a stage when I went there. And then a second stage went up. The field where we shot Quatermass with the rocket coming down and the tree and all the fire engines, they finally built stage on that too and everything. So all our stuff there went.
This macabre world peeked over the studio fence.
In those days, the filmmakers still actually knew how to make films and not deals.
We had 6 weeks to make the movies.
And of course, I think it got to the end of the 6 weeks. And Robert was really young, still had about 3 days' work to do on the movie. And they said, no, sorry, cut your film to whatever you've got. And unfortunately, I think it suffered a little bit from the cuts.
Well, one just had to do it in the time that was allotted, and it was never enough.
After we'd been making for a while, I was asked if we could cut down, make them a bit cheaper. I was always being asked that.
The ready reckoner, if you've got a ready reckoner in your mind, that ticks over and you know exactly which line to take.
Jimmy Carreras somehow or other managed to create a sense of family in the company and amongst the company of actors, technicians and so on, who all worked over and over again on Hammer films.
Construction, it's 85%. Dialogue's not important. The actors are going to change, the actors and the directors are going to change the dialogue anyway.
We would bring the films in on budget and on schedule and deliver them. The Americans were really only interested in delivery dates because once they put it on a piece of paper, it was gospel.
If any of us could get any artistic points in, we could, but the whole overall operation was a sort of business financial situation.
I mean, in '74, Hammer did 10 movies in 1 year, and these days a major studio can't do that.
Well, I have to say that, yes, they didn't like spending too much money.
I was earning me wages, basically.
I thought the stars were behind the camera more than in front of it.
Tony Hines, who was really the head of production at any rate at Hammer.
He was a very shy man and didn't get involved in films on the floor. He was real behind-the-scenes guy.
Tony was the master at it, and he had Terry there. I mean, why interfere with a winning formula?
Tony would never complain if one altered a little bit here and there.
We did a bit on location and a lot in the studio.
I started with them when they were exclusive films, and they used to send me a script and say, Andrew, what can you do with this? It was like being in rep.
We were all a wonderful team, really. I was ready, and they buried me up to my neck, and it was getting on for lunchtime. So they said, right, we'll come and shoot the scene after lunch. So there I was, left. And
I enjoyed working at Bray so much. They asked me to do another film and another film and another film. And next thing I knew, I was something I didn't want to be. I was a horror film director.
11 or 12 years old, and then into my teenage, went with groups of friends to go see certain films. If we saw the logo of Hammer Films, we knew that it was a very special picture. We knew it was a certain kind of film. A surprising experience, usually, and shocking.
The art direction, of course, was absolutely superb.
Bernard Robinson was art director for certainly all the original horror films. Very, very clever man, making a lot out of not very much.
They had an excellent team, and they got marvelous sound from this comparatively small orchestra.
We never went over budget or over schedule.
There were many times when I didn't finish a score until maybe the morning of the recording.
And we delivered them, so we delivered the goods.
They made films in all sorts of genres. They made war pictures and, you know, quote, program movies.
We took a few more chances, perhaps, but the structure, the family feeling, the flavor, the units, the directors, it remained very much the same.
Listen to the themes of James Bernard, and you can hear the syllables of the film's titles.
She who must be obeyed.
Technically, the pictures were very good. Jack Asher's camera work and the James Bernard scores were exceptional. They seem to be doomed to do the same thing and just have to keep repeating themselves over and over.
Bernie Robinson, brilliant. An awful lot of what we got away with, and I can actually say got away with, was due to Bernie. In Yesterday's Enemy, it was the Burma War. Bernie did revolving jungles and things. Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was president of the Burma Star Association, sat next to me at the premiere. And during the picture, he said, "I know that place. Where did you shoot that? I know that place." I hadn't the heart to say on stage 3 at Shepperton. And then they had a set there which was a Ruritanian village, which was a standby set they kept the whole time. I had to keep repairing it.
Suitably redressed, this Ruritanian village became Parisian back streets, alleys of Victorian London, or the docks of Hong Kong.
Have you ever had your bones scraped, Captain? It is painful in the extreme, I can assure you.
You have sinned against the goddess Kali. Those that sin against Kali must suffer the pain of never looking upon her face again.
The incredible truth about India's Thuggees, the butchers of Bombay, deadlier than their native cobras.
For the 1959 remake of The Mummy, Bernard Robinson's art department and construction crew recreated the tombs of ancient Egypt.
It was a very good movie. It looked absolutely wonderful. It looked like a multi-million-dollar film. You know, the real stars of Hammer, in my opinion, were people like Bernard Robinson, the art director.
He who robs the graves of Egypt dies.
Pre-production art puzzled me. I saw a poster of the mummy striding through the countryside with a light shining through his body as though he had a car headlamp or something. And I said to Teddy Fisher, we mustn't cheat the audience. Could I take the harpoon in the study and run it right through old Christopher, and he can just break it off and just carry on regardless?
But it did enable me, with movement and with the eyes and the thought in the eyes, to create a character. The movement is terribly important, how you reach out a hand. How you reach out a hand, is it to take somebody, or is it, because you're desperately seeking help?
Tony didn't think The Mummy was serious enough. I mean, by this time, he's now steeped in the true Gothics, and it's quite true, The Mummy is a little bit more colourful and a little bit more adventurous. I like doing it. In fact, the only horror films I ever personally made were the two mummies, or if not three, I can't remember. I enjoy directing, of course, yes. I mean, I don't know anybody who wouldn't enjoy directing.
How did he die, man? Dr. Pepper signed the certificate natural causes. I should have thought from the look of the poor fellow that he died of fright.
Starring Peter Cushing as the parson who knew every secret of the night creatures.
Kenneth Hyman, son of Hammer's silent partner and later head of Warner Brothers, proposed a Sherlock Holmes series to begin with The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Some revolting sacrificial rite has been performed. Depths a human being can sink to.
What human being could have done this?
That is precisely what I intend to find out.
How can you be so certain that somebody took one of the bishop's spiders and deliberately placed it in Sir Henry's room? That it wasn't in the luggage he brought from South Africa?
Elementary, my dear Watson. There are no tarantulas in South Africa.
What do you want me to do?
Identify anything I may find. Strange things are to be found on the moor.
Like this, for instance.
The bad guys. In fact, after doing The Curse of Frankenstein, the next part I played was the romantic lead, Sir Henry Baskerville, in The Hound of the Baskervilles. That was before I did Dracula. I think I'm right in saying this. I'm sure if I'm wrong, I'll be instantly corrected.
Swine! You thought it was going to be easy, didn't you? Didn't you? You won't be the first of your family to fall back. And you won't be the first to die because of it.
Alas, Holmes did not inspire a string of sequels like Dracula or Frankenstein.
For heaven's sake, which way?
Playwright Wolf Mankiewicz received double Hammer's usual salary for this Freudian twist on Dr. Jekyll.
For God's sake, man, don't kill him!
Let me alone, Jekyll. Let me alone.
Jekyll.
I deserve nothing better than you.
Desire drove her to deception. Jealousy drove him to madness.
Will we ever know who we really are? Who are you, Kitty?
A fascinating new Dr. Jekyll.
Who are you?
A terrifying new Mr. Hyde.
Where's Henry?
Believe me, your husband is here.
But audiences didn't warm to the film, nor to the handsome Mr. Hyde. The picture was a financial failure under several titles.
At that time, we actually were doing, in my opinion, some of the best films we ever made. Hell is a City, one of the first and the strongest of the police type of drama. I mean, the forerunner of all the things that eventually came out on television, and very much the American police type drama.
I want children, Julia.
Oh, no, don't start all that again.
Look, Julia, we're both still plenty young enough. We could have some fine kids. Your life wouldn't be so empty.
Factual, you know, shot on the streets, Val Guest directed. I did a war story, very strong story, about war crimes and how a crime is a crime when it's done by the enemy, but when it's done by your own troops, it's supposedly, you know, you had to do it to survive.
You won't understand what I'm saying. It doesn't really matter anymore. 2 days ago, I had a wife. A wife I loved very dearly. You murdered her. I still have a 5-year-old son. My last prayer is that he will live long enough to forget your vile, inhuman.
Holy cow. Then Tony found The Pony Cart, which I think was a play, if I'm not mistaken, and turned it into a very strong film, a warning, never take sweets from a stranger.
That's right. That was the only film I photographed for them, yes, which I thought was a very good film. I think that's the trouble if you have a sort of trademark like Hammer, you have to keep producing the same films.
Don't put that little girl of yours on the stand to testify against my father. Now, don't do that. Get out of here. They'll tear her apart, and they'll do it on my instructions.
Well, maybe she had something on.
Maybe you had something on.
I didn't.
Maybe you were fully dressed the whole time, and this whole outrageous story of Mr. Olderbury making you undress is a lie.
It isn't, he did. I
with nothing on?
Sometimes.
Do you do it often?
Sometimes after my bath.
In front of other people?
For Daddy and...
Oh, so your daddy likes to see you dance naked?
Yes.
Well, what a very unusual household. Well, I object very
The problem there was that the critics never forgave us for being successful. There's no doubt about that. And when they saw this film, which was serious, they accused us of really trying to capitalize on the elements of it. It was a very, very wrong criticism, in my opinion. And it was started by a couple of critics who actually never, ever gave a Hammer film of any sort a good critic.
The Damned, an intelligent and subtle science fiction thriller, also lost money at the box office.
Joe Losey on The Damned, he took a lot of interest in the music. The people in sort of frightening-looking uniforms who had to go in and visit the children who were being kept underground to survive after the world had been blown up by an atomic bomb. I had a sort of a slow, sinister kind of walking little theme or something. I need some little high sound. And I didn't know what he meant, because often directors don't know really what they want. You know, they know it's not quite what they do want, but they don't know how to explain it. So John Hollington said to me, Jimmy, go to the piano and stand over the strings, not by the notes, but over the strings of the piano. And when I do that, just plink one of the strings. And we did that at certain moments, and Joe at the end said, perfect, that's just what I wanted.
Even a picture like These Are the Damned, which is one of my favorite Hammer films, which is a kind of an atypical Hammer film. It's sort of intellectual, and I don't think that the studio really was that crazy about the movie. Is the ads in Britain are, you know, basically big busty shots of Shirley Ann Field and you know, the intimations of incest and, you know, all sorts of dirt.
Don't ever do that again, Joni.
I'll do what I like, King.
Do you think I'll let a man put his dirty hands on you?
And the American ads are no better. They have children with like icicles hanging off their noses or something. I mean, that's really a much maligned and not very appreciated picture, but I think one of the best things they ever did.
Why are you doing this? What's it all for? What are you trying to make out of these children?
The financial failure of these experiments convinced James Carreras to stay within the proven formula. It was hard to argue with success. Michael Carreras ordered the backlot transformed for a film about the Inquisition, but the Catholic League of Decency threatened to ban it. Luckily, Jimmy Carreras sold Universal on another movie on the basis of the poster. But Hammer had to absorb the cost of a Guy Endore novel, Werewolf of Paris. With no money left, Tony Hines became a writer out of necessity.
And all I know is I was landed with a set of Spanish sets.
British censors objected to everything. Violent conception of the werewolf child, his sacrilegious birth on Christmas Day, even a nobleman picking a scab from his nose. Hammer argued that the film was less graphic than Hitchcock's Psycho. The censor replied, Terence Fisher is not Alfred Hitchcock.
Oliver Reed was one of the many who got early breaks with Hammer, including Leslie Ann Down, Donald Sutherland and Freddie Jones. Reoccurring character actors like Michael Ripper, Richard Wordsworth, George Woodbridge and Miles Malleson gave the films the cozy feel of a rep company.
The quality of acting in those pictures was way above what you would usually get in that kind of film. People realized that good actors could indeed find elements in these characters that really brought out some of the drama.
Professional frustration caused Michael Carreras to leave in 1961.
I mean, I went off and did my thing for a couple of years. I did a musical, which I always wanted to do. I made a Western, which things I would never have been able to do at Hammer.
Executive chores fell to Tony Hines, who handed the producer's reins to Tony Nelson Keyes and later Aida Young, one of the first female producers in England.
I don't think Aida was as dedicated as we were. She, rightly so in a way, her idea was just to get the film through.
Everybody who worked for Hammer loved what they were doing. We didn't have enormous budgets. We worked very long hours in very cramped facilities. It was only a big old house. And we did remarkable things. If you look at the old films, the old horror films that were made in that old house, it's quite remarkable. You'd think we'd shot in at MGM or Pinewood.
It was Tony Hines' unpleasant duty to keep costs down. Jack Asher's painstaking photography took time. Time was money. Other cameramen like Michael Reed and Arthur Grant became regulars. Budgets were stretched to the limit.
I said, there's one way we can make them back to back. That is to say, we do a picture, same car, same sets, and do 2 pictures.
So I remember seeing Rasputin, the Mad Monk, and the Reptile, and they were all shot in the same sets, and Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and Plague of the Zombies were all shot in the same sets. So it was sort of like watching the same picture twice.
I think it's probably the best thing Christopher Lee's ever done. Rasputin was supposed to have had this ability to hypnotize people. Well, Chris practically developed that ability. It was an incredible performance.
Tomorrow you are taking the little Tsar to the frozen river. While you are there, you will see to it that he meets with an accident. He will be hurt, and you will send for me. You will go away and destroy yourself. Grigori, no!
2 weeks into the shooting of my Rasputin, Tony Hines came to me and said, Don, we're in trouble. We've got to save money. Now, we've worked out possible savings. There's this way of doing it, and this way, and this way. Each of those would save $25,000. Look at these suggestions, take them home, think about them over the weekend, but on Monday morning, I want a decision from you. But this was the marvelous thing. He left it to me to decide which would do the least damage in telling the story. He left it to me to say, all right, we can keep that sequence, but we don't have to build that set for it. I can put it into a set we've already used.
Cary Grant suggested he'd like to try a horror picture. So Tony Hines reworked Phantom of the Opera, but Grant dropped out. The role was played by Herbert Lom.
Young woman, you must come with me.
More than in any other film, Terry Fisher emphasized the romance and sadness in the story. Because the script was written for Cary Grant, the dirty business was left to a homicidal dwarf. The distributor publicized the film widely as a horror story.
But as anyone knows who has read the Gaston Leroux novel or seen the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, it is a tragic romance. Missing the point, Time magazine called the Phantom about as dangerous as dear old Grandad dressed up for Halloween. The distributor blamed the failure on Terence Fisher, who did not direct for Hammer for 2 years. The unused climax of Brides of Dracula was revamped, if you'll pardon the expression, by Tony Hines in Kiss of the Vampire. Director Don Sharp proved as adept at Gothic eroticism as Terence Fisher. Even more so than in Dracula, vampirism is linked to sexual appetites.
I don't think anybody could replace Tony Hines with that same understanding of the basic plots that would adapt to the genre. I don't think anybody else had the same sympathy, the same feeling for quality.
Richard Matheson, author of The Incredible Shrinking Man, adapted his novel I Am Legend, but the script proved too intense for the censors. Hammer sold it to Robert Lippert, who shot it in Italy with Vincent Price as Last Man on Earth.
But Matheson also adapted a classic Dennis Wheatley novel, retitled by American distributors. They worried that audiences would assume The Devil Rides Out had to be a cowboy movie.
The premise is what makes it work. You don't get any idea and then say, well, I'm going to turn this into a scary picture. The premise has to be frightening to begin with.
Rex, do you believe in evil?
As an idea.
Do you believe in the power of darkness?
As a superstition.
Now, there you are wrong. The power of darkness is more than just a superstition. It is a living force which can be tapped at any given moment of the night.
I remember Tony Hines ringing me and saying, Jimmy, you've got to do a very good job on this because I don't think it's working. Anyway, he was quite wrong in his judgment, wasn't he?
The lights.
Well, what about the lights?
They seem to be dimmer.
Terry Fisher was back as director, and whenever he gave me a close-up, I'd make a point of walking up to him and slipping a $5 into his hand. The crew really believed I'd bribed him for a close-up every time we did it.
I felt kind of guilty because I spoke ill of that picture for quite a while, mostly because it seemed to me it had been miscast and that several of the special effects were very cheap looking.
But any movie that dealt with the fantastic, okay, it all automatically got a, I forgave anything, right? Any single thing that went wrong with it.
As I watch it again, I overlook those things, and it had some very, very good stuff in it. And Christopher Lee was wonderful, as Charles Gray was too.
There's light in the hall.
In 1968, Hammer Films received the Queen's Award for Industry for bringing £2.5 million into Britain for 3 consecutive years.
They weren't given the Queen's Award for Industry, whatever, for nothing. I mean, they were really making a dent in the American market in a way that I don't think anybody has made since.
The creators of The Avengers brought Hammer a movie idea inspired by a lunchtime joke.
Brian Clemens was sitting there, and Brian suddenly said, I know what happens. He mixes up the potion, he drinks it, and he turns into a woman. Well, we all fell about laughing. It's a very funny idea, but he wasn't laughing. He went home and he wrote the script.
Ralph Bates played one of the title roles, but the company had some difficulty coming up with Dr. Jekyll's better half.
There was some talk about me playing Sister Hyde. I was going to say Dr. Jekyll. And a very fine actress went on to play. There was quite a bit of nudity, and I wasn't that keen on that.
David Booth, I think was the name of the agent, said, "Oh, Martine, it's perfect. You've come at the absolute perfect time." And they said, they've got the guy and it's Hammer. And I said, Michael Carreras? He said, yes. And I read the script and I realized that they had some nudity, and I said, okay, fine, top but not full nudity. I agreed to do that because I thought it was an important change. And in fact, I still think it's probably one of the best scenes in the film.
But of course, once you saw the two of them together, it was a brilliant piece of casting. And she did it very well, too.
But unfortunately, he was pressured. I think everybody was pressured, including Hammer was being pressured into going into more nudity, to compete with what was going on. And they decided to go even further to full frontal nudity when I got on the set, and I said I did not agree to that, So we had a bit of a contretemps. However, I used all of that sort of nervousness and that sort of rage and anger and stuff to birth myself, really. I mean, when I'm there, I don't know anything about my anatomy even.
It is I who exist, Dr. Jekyll, not you. It is I who will be rid of you. Rid of you! Rid of you!
It's just the idea, the male to the female, and this could be so great. They could have taken it so much further.
It's
Hyde, isn't it? How is your brother?
He hasn't been himself of late. Years later, when I saw Roy Ward Baker, he said to me, "Martine, I wish we had really gone into the male-female."
And that they did. As the 1970s progressed, the new formula became a little more blood and a lot more flesh. Victorian costumes lent themselves to fascinating visuals. And as early as 1959, Hammer added nudity, the man who could cheat death.
Which is a remake of The Man in Half Moon Street. Anton Diffring was one of the premier actors of the Berlin Theatre.
I've been taking this fluid every 6 hours now. It's madness. It is what keeps me alive.
It was very necessary. It was in very good taste. But England at that time would have no nudity. So there was a version which they paid me extra for Europe. And it was very beautifully done.
It was beautifully done. Exploitation.
I think Hammer films were exploitation films. I mean, exploitation films basically are films that are designed to exploit via advertising a particular sensational aspect. And if you ever look at the British ads for Hammer films, they are incredibly tasteless. I mean, they really make the pictures look like AIP pictures from the 50s, whereas the American ads tend to be models of restraint, actually, in comparison.
The keystone of Hammer's international appeal were the lovely ladies they used on screen.
Because I want to see you die.
Unlike actors, actresses were often used as window dressing, rarely appearing in more than 2 or 3 films for the company.
I'd been doing a poster for an English campaign called Lamb's Navy Rum. And apparently he used to see this big hoarding or this big poster every day. Supposedly, he said, find that girl and bring her in. And then I was put under contract for a year, which is wonderful. But no duties, no official duties.
I had a photograph on the front page of one of the tabloid papers in England one Sunday, and Jimmy Carrera saw it and said, I'd like that girl for my next Hammer film. He would take care of you. He was a fatherly type figure, and he had everyone's respect.
Outside producers approached Hammer with the Victorian Ghost Story by Sheridan Le Fanu.
Harry Fine and Michael Stile came to me and asked me to do it, but they were reading into it a great deal of lesbianism, which I don't think Sheridan Le Fanu had ever sort of dreamed of, and neither did I, incidentally. It was the old story that 100 vampire pictures have been made. What on earth can we do next with vampires? I know, we'll make them lesbians. Yeah, brilliant.
It's very funny, actually, because I walked onto the set the first day of my shooting. Peter Cushing was in the process of decapitating me. I don't know, it made me swallow. It was quite funny when he stabbed her and pulled her up and slashed her head off and held this head up high. I thought, oh, that's me. And I remember showing the photograph of it to my mother, and she laughed, and I thought, funny mother. The fangs kept falling out, and they kept falling into Kate O'Mara's cleavage, and the crew wanted to help retrieve them.
And it's very easy to make lunatics or vicars or indeed lesbians or homosexuals of various kinds, to make them figures of fun.
You must die. Everybody must die.
To me, that is fatal. I think that's, well, it's downright rude and vulgar, apart from anything else.
Co-production funds came from Hammer's opposite number in Hollywood, American International Pictures.
I had a certain amount of criticism while I was making it, that it wasn't going to be juicy enough, you know, and all that.
Ingrid Pitt proved as enticing to co-star Ferdy Mayne as to the camera.
I met her in a picture called Where Eagles Dare. Oh, well, I won't forget that one. She used rather provocative language in between takes, and it was rather delicious to be bitten by her. You know, we knew each other. We'd met in Salzburg worked there together, and she said, "Oh, yes, I remember you. You played a small part, didn't you?" When she became very pleasant and rather sexy, I accepted this as a sort of turn of character. Wasn't so small anyway.
In The Vampire Lovers, for instance, somebody throws a dagger at Ingrid Pitt, and the dagger goes straight through her, and she just disappears. It's a romantic view, an essential element in horror pictures, which has been almost, well, now totally lost.
Even before the film was finished, an ill-fated sequel began on the same sets.
We start with a title. We think to ourselves, what's a good title? And we think, To Love a Vampire. And so then we make a poster. And with this poster, I go around and see these distributors and say to them, how would you like to have a picture called To Love a Vampire? And they say, oh, wonderful, when can I have it? So I say, well, perhaps we can deliver it in about 6 months' time. And I say, you want to see a script, or do you want to know who's in it? And they say, no, don't bother about that. This is a Hammer film, and we know it'll be all right.
Jutta Steinsgård replaced Ingrid Pitt as Carmilla. Peter Cushing dropped out because of the illness of his wife. He was replaced by Ralph Bates. Terry Fisher was scheduled to direct.
And Terry got sick, and it was about within 2 or 3 weeks of starting shooting, and they asked me what I'd like to do. And I said yes. I was engaged as a director without much muscle. Hated the movie, hated it.
I spent the whole of last night going through Giles's researches. And believe me, they are powerful evidence.
Evidence? Of what?
That you are a vampire.
You say that. And tell me you love me.
Prove to me that you're not. Love me.
I hadn't even seen the first cut. And I remember I went under the seat and they had some love song in it. It was really quite embarrassing. I mean, really incredibly embarrassing, actually. I mean, fortunately, nobody in the audience knew who I was, but I still went under the seat. I curled up. I died.
Hope to become known as an extremely good actress. And I hope to get an Oscar sometime.
With Jutta Steinsgård, I don't mean to demean her talent in any way. I think she's very talented and did a lovely job. My claim to fame was a toothpaste commercial, and very, very well endowed, and also which helped, I'm sure.
Doubly endowed were Mary and Madeline Collinson, Playboy's first twin centerfolds, stars of the third spin-off directed by John Huff.
The devil has sent me twins of evil.
The Camilla character was reduced to a bit part.
They kept doing the same things to death. I mean, it was like a big thrill to have a lesbian vampire movie, which is, it turned out to not be something that people particularly wanted to see anyway.
Sometimes the sex was worse than arbitrary. Sir James insisted that Terry Fisher shoot a rape scene in Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed for the United States version.
That was a big disappointment to me, and it was to Peter as well. We talked about that a lot. We were not very comfortable about it because we'd almost completed the whole film. There was no reason. I had no reaction to Frankenstein as if he'd raped me, even though the scene was put in the film much earlier. That was a very difficult thing for me to do. And it was difficult for Terry, too. He was very sensitive about it. And in the end, he just said, enough is enough. And he cut the cameras. He just didn't want to continue them.
Ironically, it was later cut as unnecessary.
Doctor, you'll perform an autopsy.
On a body that's turned to stone?
Why do you want Paul out of the way, Nemiroff? Is it because you're afraid he'll take Carla away from you? Or is it because you think he'll find out about the secret that you share with Ratoff?
Don't you realize that you get uglier each time you get old? And you can't go on killing forever?
Why not?
Female fiends never found the audience of the male monsters. Actresses fared better with the non-fantasy thrillers. Susan Strasberg in Taste of Fear.
Father?
To give you a sedative, young lady, and then in the morning when you wake up, everything will be all right.
Don't you understand what I'm trying to say? My father is dead. His body's in the summer house.
Luna Bankhead in Fanatic.
You must die. Die, my darling.
Bette Davis in The Nanny.
You mustn't make it difficult for Nanny, Master Joey.
Working again with Kenny Hyman, Michael Carreras found an interesting mix of fantasy and flesh.
And also, it wasn't that much more expensive. I mean, we went on location, which was the great thing. I mean, with She, we went to Israel. With A Million Years, we went to the Canary Islands.
They didn't like to have too large an orchestra. I think the biggest I ever had might have been, possibly for She, Michael Carreras might have let us have up to 40. I think She had 50 minutes, which was a hell of a lot of music.
H. Rider Haggard's overpowering adventure classic, She, comes to the motion picture screen.
I thought it was boring, I must tell you, simply again, because it's all very well to say, okay, let's do a remake, but when you look at the original, and it's so marvelous, and it's got scenes of thousands of people, and they give you fourpence to do it. I mean, the color then shows up all the imperfections. I mean, I'm not saying that Ursula Andress is an imperfection. She's a delight and delicious. But you couldn't make the film. I mean, I kept referring to the old film, and everything we shot looked like a poor imitation. I mean, we were the poor relatives. Yes, color, but we couldn't make the film. I thought we tried to do too much for too little money.
We must stop this.
How far do you think we'd get? Don't forget, sir, they were going to take a knife and fork to Mr. Lear.
The first Hammer film that I remember was a double bill that played at the Little Theatre in Bath, and the poster for that featured both Raquel Welch and Ursula Andress, both of them in a state of semi-undress. I would have been 15 or 16 years old, and it was an unmissable double bill, 2 films for the price of 1.
I was called on the telephone by Dick Zanuck, who was head of the studio then. He said, "We've got this fabulous project for you, Raquel. It's called 1 Million Years BC, and it's a remake of a Victor Mature, Carol Landis movie." And I said, "Oh my God, not a dinosaur movie. Man, I'll never live this one down." I figured, well, Steve McQueen got away with The Blob. You know, maybe I can get away with 1 Million Years BC. You know, nobody will remember this thing. I can shove it under the carpet, you know? But people remembered it. For the kind of films that Hammer makes, I thought that they always do a very good job. They have a certain budget, and they have a certain look they're trying to achieve. It's not Gone with the Wind, it's not a David Lean movie, relatively speaking. I thought it was a pretty well-done movie. Ray Harryhausen, who was a kind of genius of sorts to do all of these very the special effects and this frame-by-frame photography, and it was all explained to me, you know, in great detail.
So I took on the project with the Hammer Company in London. It was a pleasure to get back to dinosaurs again. They were my first love.
The man was a genius. But the frightening thing, of course, is that when you're looking at the rushes, after a full day's work, you go into the theatre the next day, you've got 6 frames. You know, I mean, it's better to hold them up to the light, because otherwise they've gone through so quickly.
Carl Toms really made the most of this little doeskin number that I was supposed to wear. So this costume got smaller and smaller as the production went on, and I felt a little self-conscious with this very brief thing on all the time. Alternately, I would try to sort of strut my stuff to make the most of it, because I figured, obviously, this is why they've cast me in this movie, not for my acting ability, because I have no lines.
I think if cave women in the early days looked like Raquel Welch, why, we've regressed considerably today.
When you were doing it, it just seemed so ridiculously silly. You felt like a fool, quite frankly.
Jamaican-born Martine Beswick writhed her way through her portrayal of the naughty Neanderthal.
What was happening was that Raquel had this lovely, everything was like perfect, and mine looked like a rag, you know, so I was a bit jealous. She had more makeup and she had eyelashes, and I had to go like a pig woman. And then you have this big girl fight in the middle. The Queen of the Shell people and the Queen of the Rock people had to have a girl fight. And we had to do destry rides again in the caves of Tenerife. The whole thing was kind of like a dance. Martine and I worked out this whole routine together. I just loved to do the action stuff. I should have been a boy. I got on really well with everybody, particularly John Richardson. We didn't actually marry, but we were for a long time. We were together for a long time. My leading man was like to die over. He was probably, when I first saw him, one of the most beautiful men I'd ever seen in my life. I was like dumbstruck. I thought, man, look at this guy. I mean, those blue, I mean, he's the pretty one. I mean, I look butch next to him.
We often wonder whether the attraction of Miss Welch or the dinosaurs were the important thing in the picture.
Started me off. So I guess Dick Zanuck was right, you know.
We had some sets standing from Million Years BC. The idea came on to make a quickie.
And he said, Martine, I've got something. He said, I want you to be my queen. I said, oh, all right, darling. What? Well, I want to do this film called
Slave Women of the White Rhino. I mean, what else can I say?
You've got to be kidding.
Why did you come?
I can only believe the fates brought me here.
And they brought you to me.
And all the little blondies had these, they just came right out of acting school. And everybody had these like really English voices like this, you know, and it was hysterical.
I am queen here. I will not be denied.
Bosco Holder, Geoffrey Holder's brother. And he did all the dance scenes. I sort of was let loose after he choreographed it. I thought, listen, this is my vehicle. I get to have eyelashes in this one, and I get to have my costume fit. I'm going to make this work, no matter what it is.
We made a huge mistake on that film because we really should have had those wonderful cartoon biff, bang, ouch. It should have been done like that.
Who are you?
I mean, those films did well, but as a mainstay, they didn't have the running power of the Gothic horrors.
International beauty Corita and 1,000 other sights of savagery and splendor are yours to behold. The Viking Queen.
Olenka Barova, a new star. Remember the name. You'll not forget the woman.
Nalgast directed the third saga, created in Sir James' typical manner.
Do me a picture with dinosaurs and a dinosaur with a girl in his mouth. They did this enormous great poster with sex and bikinis and the great thing. And Jimmy said, fine, okay. So he sent that to America and said, what about a picture? Here's the poster. And they set up the picture on the poster.
The dinosaurs were created by American Jim Danforth on the usual sparse budget.
He was a brilliant little guy because he used to work out all those monsters with little human traits to them, which I have never seen done before.
Sir James conversed with producer Aida Young and Brian Lawrence. Later they head the company with accountant Roy Skeggs.
Wonderful figure, very good face. Isn't it exciting to find somebody new and launch them each time, like these girls?
Somebody that looks like this,
yes.
I agree. She has to have a special kind of magnetism. I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. And Victoria Vetri has it, I'm sure.
That was a fait accompli, yes. That came over. She had been a centerfold in Playboy or something, and whoever was doing it, I don't know who the picture was done for over there. It was AIP or whoever it was. Was it Warner's? All right. So Warner said, well, give us some glamour that we know.
Although there is a more final judge than me, and that's the audience when they see Victoria Vetri for the first time.
But lightning didn't strike twice. The distributor didn't push the film widely, nor did audiences take Victoria Vetri to heart as they did Raquel Welch. Danforth received an Oscar nomination for their effects, but lost to the Disney musical Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
When dinosaurs ruled the earth.
Cost-cutting on creatures the world forgot meant no dinosaurs, no dialogue, and no clothes whatsoever. Hammer was now imitating its own films. Unfortunately, so were a lot of other people.
It's over? Yes, son. It's all over.
As early as 1958, Eros films mimicked the Quatermass style with the Trollenberg Terror.
Where there are mountains, there are always clouds.
But this one remains static. On the side of the Trollenberg, it never moves.
Freak of nature.
A radioactive freak of nature?
They also produced a Technicolor chiller with a script credited to Jimmy Frankenstein Sangster.
Sickening, isn't it?
No longer could there be this indirection and not showing things and people, describing things that had happened as opposed to seeing them. The pictures were very graphic.
Made in Hollywood by Herman Cohen within months of Curse of Frankenstein, this film referred to the doctor's ancestral home in England. Crates in his lab were even stenciled with the address 113 Wardour Street, West 1, London.
Well, that's because Herman Cohen's office was on Wardour Street, in the same building as the Hammer Films office.
But not all imitations were cheaply done. Roman Polanski made Dance of the Vampires, also known as the Fearless Vampire Killers, spoofing Brides of Dracula and Kiss of the Vampire.
Christopher, I don't think I ever forgave him. Right, he said, how dare you? How dare you make a funny character out of a serious, something that should be interpreted seriously, as he'd done it, of course.
Nevertheless, Frankenstein and Count Dracula himself returned in this musical.
Real monsters. I've seen them all in the movies. You got Frankenstein's monster, you got Igor, and on the table is this beautiful chick, long blonde hair, going, hey, sweet cakes, how are you? You got Frankenstein. We have a visitor. And you also got the vampire.
Won't you join our little party?
You get the feeling, you will lose your mind. Feeling make you holler. One more time, you go, ho, feeling hits ya.
A funny one? My God, he had no reason to criticize me. Bring him up now and say, I can see you.
Hammer's use of colour and period decor begat the Edgar Allan Poe films in Hollywood, directed by Roger Corman. Hazel Court became a familiar sight in these American international pictures.
Our hands are so cold.
Oh, I don't think there's really any difference. You just have better facilities here instead of a house, that leaks.
We often found ourselves employed by competitors like the partnership of Rosenberg and Subotsky, who suggested Frankenstein to Hammer back in 1956.
During the 60s, there were a lot of imitators of Hammer. Amicus pictures looked virtually the same, had identical casts, and I think the studio started to lose its identity a little bit.
It's alive. In someone on this train.
You're a very good detective. You discovered everything except who is now the host.
And that's our next step.
Thought this might come in handy.
Oh, good idea.
Two of you together. That's fine. But what if one of you is the monster?
Monster? They're British, you know.
Hollywood began spending millions on films we'd done for nearly nothing. Great stars, elaborate effects. And on the low-budget end, violence we'd used as punctuation became the raison d'etre. Nothing succeeds like excess. The face of Hammer changed. Tired of making quality films on diminishing budgets, Tony Hines retired at 46, though he continued to write scripts.
I think they went wrong when Tony Hines left. Other producers took over, but they were copies. They didn't have that original inspiration that he had. To me, Tony Hines was Hammer.
Sir James used all his sales ability to lure his son back to the fold.
Money. I mean, I needed the dosh. I cleared my brain and came back and got on with the job.
Inside Michael was another kind of producer trying to get out, and I think Michael had a lot more ambition for Hammer produce and wanted to go very much further.
We had a period of very good thrillers, of which Jimmy Sangster wrote many of the very good ones.
Auntie dear, my sister's insane.
Go away! Don't come near me! Don't come near me! I'm like Simon! I'm mad! I'm insane!
Diabolique. I remember seeing that the first time. I didn't know what it was going to be. My wife was highly pregnant when we saw that, and I thought we'd nearly lost the baby there. She was so frightened. I thought, I'd love to do a movie like that.
Simon belongs to me. No one shall hurt him.
If an audience thinks about Jimmy's script, then you're dead. But Jimmy used to get them rattling along at such a pace that the audience didn't have time to think about them.
Diabolique. I'm trying to remember the English title. The Devils it was called, wasn't it? I was. I must have written that about 4 times, I think. Diabolique.
So we had to do something else. You couldn't just go on churning out. I think in total, if I'm not mistaken, we did 36 Gothic horrors anyhow. So, what more can you want?
When Mike took over Hammer, he had Jimmy breathing down his neck saying, oh, you're an idiot, you're a fool, you can't do this. So he was fighting that.
Never come across anything like that before.
Seed. Giant mollusks. You will see torture pits for forbidden lovers. Barbaric sacrifice.
Look out on the starboard side!
A living hell that time forgot on the lost continent.
Michael Carreras arranged a co-production with the Run Run Shaw studio in Hong Kong.
It seemed to me that if we were going to go back and make another Dracula type, that we really ought to try and find a new way of telling the tale. So the Shaws, who I've always admired anyhow in their attitude to filmmaking, it seemed to me a natural marriage.
The idea of going to Hong Kong to make a picture, of course, was wonderful if you've never been to Hong Kong. The difficulties were absolutely enormous. But I think the combination of trying to put kung fu with straightforward horror didn't work, or at least we didn't have a script that made it work.
It was kind of a fairly cynical exercise in exploitation of that market interest, as were most Hammer films, really. But the result was absolutely brilliant, in my view. It was again, extremely intense, wonderfully shot, and the zombies in that film at the time were the best zombies ever captured on film.
Christopher Lee declined this final indignity. Instead, the Count was played by John Forbes Robertson. At least I had the honor of driving one final wooden stake.
As the seven brothers and their one sister meet Dracula.
If you're looking for trouble, you're staring it right in the face.
Shatter, you're marked. You're wearing a neon sign.
The idea came on to make a quickie. That was my idea. I mean, you know, shot on the streets, police-type drama. It wasn't at the peak of the kung fu. It was a bit late. Probably we were too late again. But I think it's something else that didn't work. I'm not saying that it necessarily makes for a better picture to have those ingredients, because you're fighting the believability factor all the time. The representatives of the major American companies, they should have said this is no good. But what they said instead was, if you can make it cheaper, or if you can show a little more of this, that, or the other, we'll do it. And I think they misled us in a way.
I think that had a lot to do with the downfall of Hammer, the lower their standards, because they had their own venue, their own way of doing things, you know, and then suddenly, because everybody was doing nudity and because it was attracting more, well, it's happening again right now. It's happening, the same thing's happening now. You know?
I think they knew pretty much what they could get away with, so that when the films were submitted for censorship, they knew what they could get away with. But definitely that was a ploy that they would use to leave something in that they knew they could take it out later without ruining the story. Probably wanted to keep on his good side socially. If you knew you had a problem picture coming up, you took him and gave him a good lunch at Les Ambassadors, one of the big restaurants in town used by the film people.
Knighted and respected, Sir James wished to retire and sell off the company. Michael wanted to keep it in family hands.
I think Jimmy was bought out, or rather, Mike got controlling interest.
Our horror stories by that time were passé. I mean, they were children's stuff when you get into chainsaw massacres and what have you. I suppose I wasn't in tune. I have to take the blame for this. I was in charge.
And Mike swears that Jimmy went round the industry and said, "Don't help my son." That's Mike's end of it. Jimmy, on the other hand, I mean, I wouldn't put that anything past him, but Jimmy, on the other hand, with that wide-eyed face, say, "I wish him all the luck in the world."
Everything is born, it flowers, and then it fades away, and eventually it dies.
The Hammer period was like the last gasp of world cinema.
I think a moment came to an end. Sir James left, retired. I think the moment came to an end. You know, there was a time and then there wasn't a time.
And as it happened, the horror thing can't go on forever. Sadly, some of the other streams that I tried to instill into the company's product line just didn't work.
I thought Vampire Circus was one of the best Hammer horror movies of the whole lot. I thought Robert Young did a marvelous job. And there were some fantastic scenes where the humans transformed into animals, and animals transformed back to humans, and things like this. And it was all a very, very sexy film as well. There was lots of sex in it. I still think it was one of the very, very best of the Hammer movies. I played the circus strongman, of course, and went through the entire film, so it was a really good part for me.
No, it was none of the old gang. We saw this disintegration happening. We were rather sad for it. because the people who were concerned with Hammer, really, other than Mike, were no longer around him.
The novelty of colour was now standard even on television. Concepts often seemed strained.
It is commonly supposed that a vampire attacks in only one way, by biting the neck and draining the victim of blood. The girls you spoke of, they were not drained of blood, but of youth, of life itself.
But they wanted it to appear nude. So we kind of came to a compromise, insofar as my hair was a lot longer in those days. And so that covered my upper chest.
When we were making that picture, I didn't realize that she didn't want to show any of her top. But it's become very apparent when you see the movie that she didn't show anything.
And I think I actually used some sort of gaffer tape or something to stick it down. So I felt quite secure in that sense. And then a pair of flesh colour knickers, briefs. And I was all right. I was all set. So it was like being on the beach, really.
Captain Cronus, in fact, I just watched Cronus today. I was amazed that the fight on the cemetery was all done on the back lot at Elstree, which was not a big back lot. It had houses pretty much all the way around. But Captain Cronus, where the cemetery was shot, was this small little hill. And when you look at the show, it's just like up the hill or down the hill, because at the camera angles, if it was filmed any differently, you would have had houses literally within 25 yards of that place.
Her life will be yours. Yours. Her youth will pulse through your veins, my darling, replenishing, restoring. Take her.
The death.
Yes, you bleed, my lord. This is God's blade. Forged for your black heart.
But lack of audience response killed Captain Kronos as a potential series.
Possibly it was too romantic. Maybe it was either ahead of its time or you know, the other way. Maybe it kind of lost in time. I'm not too sure. The timing was wrong anyway, I think.
Hammer flowed with the tide of television by adapting a BBC serial.
On the Buses is one of my least favourite films, and I don't know anyone who would put that high on their list. Interestingly, it is without doubt the most successful commercially of all the Hammer films, and still generates royalty income for the company today.
Hammer's last horror picture, so far, was made in 1975.
98% of so-called Satanists are nothing but pathetic freaks who get their kicks out of dancing naked in freezing churchyards. I have a feeling I'm dealing with that other 2%.
Richard Widmark challenges Christopher Lee for the soul of a girl named Catherine.
Te adoro et te invoco.
They've got Catherine. We've got to get her back before it's too late.
By then, a so-called low budget meant £500,000 over $1 million. Hedging their bets, Hammer brought in German co-financing and an American star, Richard Widmark. Appropriately, Christopher Lee was the heavy.
When this ceremony has been performed, I shall destroy you, John Burney.
The demons hate you, Rayner. They're waiting for you.
Catherine. Catherine. You are warned.
It's me! Don't!
The new permissiveness extended to a nude photograph of teenage Nastasia Kinski in the press book.
Hammer's last theatrical venture was made in 1979.
The Lady Vanishes.
Michael Carreras planned a new version of the thriller by Hitchcock himself.
He was a journalist. She was a madcap American heiress. Miss Froy was an English nanny.
I'm talking about the lady who was sitting right there.
There has been no English lady here.
There's a woman missing on this train. I saw her. And now people keep saying she was never there. You saw her! I know you did!
Ultimately, it was a Hammer film in name only. The dirty business was left to Phantom of the Opera's Herbert Lom.
You're asking me to remove the bandages?
No, not the whole business. Just enough so we can have one teeny tiny peek. Just so we can see the face.
But there is no face. Nobody believes you now. Nobody will believe you later.
The Lady Vanishes received scant distribution, a Loch Ness movie drowned in a sea of delay.
Michael Carreras left in 1979. Roy Skeggs helmed the company through the doldrums of the British film industry by producing 2 TV suspense series.
He makes such a noise when anything unusual happens.
Will you let me out? Now!
Oh, no. Not until you are trained. Now, please, do not try to thwart my plans. If you cause me to close this hatch, nobody will hear you. Ever.
A good third of the pictures that I worked on over there were Hammer pictures, in the space of 10 years. So that's how important they were. They provided so many jobs. If the Hammer wasn't around, a lot of people wouldn't have been in the business, and that's from art directors all the way through.
I get asked time and time again in letters and interviews and things, when is Hammer going to return, or will Hammer return?
It's a shame. I think someone should really pick up the torch and run with it.
Now, Hammer has contracted to make horror, suspense, and science fiction films with name stars and top creative talent.
Hammer's changed hands a couple of times over the last 10 years. The new Hammer obviously has to move into the 21st century with new techniques and new stories and so on, appealing to contemporary audiences. And that's what they plan to do, but always with a respectful nod backward to what the company has always represented. Quality filmmaking. Once in a while, maybe some Gothic horrors.
Entertainment technology has changed radically since the 1950s, yet Hammer thrives in this new incarnation, inspiring a nostalgic cult that reaches round the world.
They've often said, we grew up with you. You were like part of the family. We'd go on a Saturday and see these horror films and scream and yell. So we've always considered you part of us, which is wonderful.
Fan periodicals like Little Shop of Horrors, published by Richard Clemenson, savor the films like fine old wines.
Top professionals tip their hats to Bray.
Gremlins patterned its climax on the end of Hammer's original Dracula. Director Joe Dante cast Christopher Lee himself in Gremlins 2.
He said, but you have to remember, Christopher, that I and all my peers and all my colleagues, and there's a great many of them, Martin Scorsese, Brian De Palma, John Landis, Steven Spielberg, Joe Dante, and many, many others that don't come to mind at the moment. He said, we were brought up on your films when we were teenagers and young men. We were brought up on your films. We liked them, we loved them. And I'm naturally very grateful for that. It means they don't forget.
I'm not giving you bullshit. They were made by people who cared.
While we were doing them, we were dedicated to them.
I mean, as a matter of fact, as you worked out, it couldn't be better.
Those films will last forever.
Mocked and vilified in their time, these films are now revered in places like the British Film Institute as classics of their era. The world has finally come round to know what we've really known all along. Anything made by Hammer is the best.
We never thought it was going to be anything. And here it is. It's, you know, they're showing them at the Museum of Contemporary Art and the Lincoln Center, all those horror films.
It's in our blood. Film is in our blood.
Fun days.
Hammer, one of the happiest studios I've ever worked in my life. It was a family.
These motion pictures created an insular fantasy world with fiery images of love and innocence, of dark sexuality and hideous death.
We who created that world have a touch of immortality through them, and you who share that world over the years can revisit it as you would recall a favorite fairy tale, secure that in the end, good will always triumph over evil.
That is, until the next sequel.